Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Sourced Presents. My name is Lloyd Stokes. This is now episode 6 of the new Sourced Presents podcast, which you will be able to find on the usual formats, YouTube and Spotify predominantly, and actually other clips on LinkedIn, of course. Although Jo and I were just talking about LinkedIn and the algorithm problems and challenges we've got, but that's a completely separate episode. We'll cover that off on another day. Source Presents. If you've never listened to Source Presents, it is a show that we started about 18 months ago. And really the objective was to be able to interview really interesting people that were had some connection to our world, which is the kind of like tech SaaS startup space. But more importantly, actually, when I was thinking about Jo and interviewing Jo today, it's about finding people who are doing interesting things, covering topics that need to be talked about, and hopefully having a very interesting and, as we just discussed, authentic conversation around a particular point and something that maybe is important to others. This could be this whole episode, in terms of all the ones I've done, could be no more important. Like it's a huge thing, and it's something that, if I'm really honest, and Jo and I have talked about this before, when I was earlier on in my career, I think for a lot of people, it just wasn't even a consideration of mine. And now I think as I've developed and I run my own business and I hire people and I'm older, I'm slightly more mature, and I have daughters of my own, and I can see, I look forward to the worlds that they'll develop into. Meeting somebody like Jo has been highly educational, informative, fun. I've learned loads in the last 18 months. For just a bit of context, Jo and I originally were met and introduced through Melanie Mills, through an event that we both attended. So which is the Caxton, or the CCC as it's now known, let's say that, which was a community originally founded by Melanie and the team at Caxton. And I got invited, and essentially the idea was to bring women and men together, actually. So with like strong allyship, to talk about the world for women, the business world for women, and provide a platform and a forum for people to be able to share information, advice, help, but from different perspectives. So different levels and stages of career, different genders, different ages, lots of different things. So that's how Jo and I met. And today we are going to talk about her background, what she does right now, and kind of like the way that she works with organizations, with women and with men, to talk around women in the workplace. And lastly, before I finish talking, because I always talk for too long at the beginning of this, one of the things that I would really wanted to get out of this conversation is that maybe the framing for this conversation is that we work and spend all of our time working with organizations who are looking to build their businesses, and the vast majority of those businesses are founded by men, invested by men, and have even if they're in their infancy of 10 people, have mostly men working in those organizations. And the common conversation that I've had over the years is with founders, with leaders, is we have to get more women into our business. And the reasons for that vary, and they're largely sound. But there's a challenge there that exists in our world, definitely, which is that it's still today is a very male-driven environment, which is where the figures vary, but 20 to maybe 30% at the absolute max of technology sales people are women. So that's one of the things we'll cover. Anyway, I've talked for too long. Jo, thank you for just listening to me. Maybe you could kind of give a bit of background on you. Yeah.
Of course. And don't ever thank me for listening to you, Lloyd. I love listening to you. It's great working with you. So as Lloyd's just said, we've had probably now we've just got an 18-month history of working together, and it's just an absolute pleasure, to be honest with you. So thanks for having me. Let's hope your listeners don't mind swearing. Just switch off now if you do, because it's let's do some intros. So if you just me up online, you'll find me as Jo Phillips, the woman behind the women. And absolutely everything I do is about helping women to ascend in the workplace. So the work that I do with my private clients, one by one, is we help them to close their pay gap, gain a promotion, or to find a new role. And I also work with organisations to help organisations not just attract women, but also retain them, right? Because we tend to lose women between the managerial piece and the leadership piece. So we promote men at 60% and we promote women at 40%. Women are promoted on the basis of their experience, men are promoted on the basis of their potential. So, but how did I get here and how did I land up in front of Lloyd? Well, I fell out of school, fell out of secondary school, did my A-levels, went along to see university and thought, no, halls are not for me. No, can't live with a hall and this accommodation. So, and that makes me sound as though I was brought up with a silver spoon. Absolutely not true. That's single parent, lone parent family, 3 girls, and the narrative in our house was always that there isn't enough money. There's not enough money, and you're not doing well enough. That was the narrative. Now, that isn't to say that I wasn't raised. I had a lovely upbringing, but that was the narrative. So I then end up, and I go to work for, the very first job I have is working for a technical recruitment agency. So this is engineers, mechanical, electrical, electronic, and this is in the maintenance world, FMCG, and it's in recruitment. And I can't believe, Lloyd, that you can be paid money for speaking to people. The fuck's that about? This is brilliant. So hang on a minute. I speak to you. I find out all about what you do in your working day. I then tell this organisation all about who you are and what you want to do. You have a chat, effectively, and we make some money. Great. Couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe that this was my world. And so my first foray into recruitment was in the technical side of things. But I'm only just 19. And at 19, that means that not only am I naive, I'm quite determined, and I don't understand the politics that exist within the workplace. I don't get it. I don't understand the male gaze yet. I don't understand why somebody might not want to work with me. I don't understand. I'm naive. And there was a point where I had invoiced more than any of the men on the team across the same period of time. And so I was in a position whereby I'd been there for 9 months. I've now, as an individual contributor, invoiced more than those 9 collectively. And my first experience of the patriarchy was my leadership taking me to one side and saying, right, we now need to distribute all of your sales amongst the team. And this is at the time where we had those old-fashioned whiteboards in the room. You'll remember. Yeah, old-fashioned whiteboard and pen, and we'd write up who'd build what, and they distribute.
Still have those.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love them.
Because I can remember what I'm doing. So, and that was really my first. Hang on a second. So it's not right here. So you're telling me that I can work super hard, I can bill, I can be literally living the dream. I was pretty enjoying myself, Lloyd. I was earning money. I was buying my first car. I could contribute to at home. There wasn't a no with money. It was all turning out to what I wanted to be. And so I moved on quite quickly from there. But I then moved on to work for 2 other, one international, both internationals, one much more widely known than the other. And again, during my career, all I saw was women either be lowballed or not be able to negotiate the right salary, or clients and organisations saying, well, we'll offer her this because she was earning this, so we'll just give her a little bit more, without even considering, actually, that still means she's underpaid. She's still got a pay gap. And so in the last 20 or so years of my career, I'm very old now, I don't like saying it was, God, it's like 3 decades of working. It's ridiculous over that. I work within learning and development and train hundreds, if not thousands, of recruiters. And what we would always focus on and here is that actually for women to be promoted was much tougher. They're much more likely to be overlooked, and I would hear that constant kickback from clients.
Mm.
So, and from my recruitment consultants. So by the time we hit 2020, I made the decision that actually I was going to go out on my own, and I was going to work really with my passion. And my passion piece is helping women to get to where they want to be. So that's where we are today.
I love it. How much of growing up in a kind of sole parent family, one of 3 sisters, has influenced that kind of your drive, your determination, your attitude? Because those, I think often I do these conversations with people and we don't spend enough time talking about actually where it all started. And sometimes it's an escape because I grew up as one of 5 and my parents divorced and money was always a topic. The thing that that my parents argued about was money. And I remember listening to it. And so I had this thing when I started my career, and I had like 15 different jobs. But I remember the same thing when I got into recruitment. There's this light bulb moment that went off, and I was 25. And it's funny you say the thing about being paid to speak to people, because that was my thing. I was like, hang on, like all I've got to do is just have lots of conversations with people, and I'll get paid. But there was a moment there where I was like, hang on, that whole like thing of not enough money and not enough kind of various things as children really kind of hit home when I was 25, because I was like, I can influence this now, I can change this, and it's had a big impact on me all the way through my working life. I think like that desire to not just earn money, but to cultivate relationships that are the right types of relationships, to not argue about money, for example, within my personal relationships. But for you, growing up as one of 3 girls, sole parent family, what impact do you think that's had on your career?
Huge. I can hands down say it was huge. So at the age of 14, I was working. Can you imagine now? I just can't imagine sending, my son's 12. I just cannot imagine in 2 years' time me even letting him go to a shop to work for 8 hours. Well, he couldn't anyway, but it just, so I worked for, and you might not remember them, so I don't know if the audience will do, but there was a shoe shop called Freeman Hardy Willis.
Yeah. Yep.
And I would sell more shoes on a Saturday than the whole team would during the week. I could sell shoes to women, no problem at all. These shoes were what, 10 or a pair? I don't know, I can't remember. I used to do like 1,000, 1,500 quid worth of sales a day. I used to love it. Which one? Oh, better have it in that colour as well. There we go, off we go. But the impact for me was that I could feel that there was a release from the pressure of the scarcity of money.
Okay.
So everything I was driven towards wanting to make sure that I felt safe and secure in my earning. And that started at a really young age because I could see the impact that it had on my mum, where she'd raised the 3 of us with really very little help or input from my father. And so when I hit kind of 19, 20 and realised that not only could I earn, I could earn. And this wasn't just feeding me.
Yep.
Hang on a minute. There's some serious cash. And so, and I think when you do it well in recruitment, you can really excel. And so the impact for me was I'd watch my mum do nothing but work and study for years. And I knew that I didn't want a life where everything felt so restrictive. And even now, but what the irony of it is of course, my 12-year-old just sees me work or study. There you go. The irony of it is, he won't even interrupt me on the laptop because he knows mummy's work.
It's an interesting point about working ages as well. About kind of that it is a separate topic, but I mean, I was the same when I was. I had a paper round, which I did 6 mornings a week. I did I did 6 mornings a week. I was, let's say 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, let's say 12. I was at 12 o'clock. Let's say I was, yeah, I would have been 12. I just started secondary school. Um, the village shop, which was just down the bottom of the road, you had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I was up at 5:45, get down there, 30 odd papers, cycle round, drop them round. That was an hour. Back home at 7, get changed, showered, have some food, go to school. 6 days a week. So what's that? 30 times 680 papers a week. And I got paid £6.50 for doing it, which I thought was amazing. I thought that was the best bit about it, and I've told this story to so many people before actually, is that the last person I delivered the paper to on my round was my nan, because my nan lived at the end of the road. And what I don't tell so many people, what I'm happy to sell is that say is that I actually used to nick her paper every morning. So I never paid for it. I just stuffed the Daily Mail in extra. And then at the end, and I told her that, and she was like, you can't do that. I was like, I can, it's okay. And on the Saturday, she used to give me a tenner. So I made more from her just delivering one paper that I'd stolen than I did for delivering 180 papers. Anyway, my £6.50 was then £16.50, and I got a massive fry up on a Saturday morning. But I was 12 years old, and then I went on to do mowing lawns, car washing, doing whatever I could. And then when I was 16, I got a job working in a hotel. So it definitely influences you.
For sure. For sure. And I think the narrative at home for me with my child is trying to show him that you can have a certain standard of life, but you have to work for it. And there's a balance, right? But I try very hard not to do the scarcity piece with him. That doesn't mean to say that we live the life right, that we don't. You know, there are beans on toast for dinner. Of course there are. But equally, you know, if he wants a steak once a month, he can have it. So it's just about balance. And I don't want
Yeah.
there to be a scarcity mindset. And I think going back to the female piece, and in terms of how we negotiate as women, we're so grateful for anything we get offered or get given
Yeah.
that we forget that actually we've got our own worth and that we can go for what we ought to be paid.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. A side note, but I think it's important because actually it's really, in fact, it's really important because one of the things I've spoken to various people about, and you and I have discussed this around kind of the challenges that exist today for women. There's one part of it is talking to the audience of people who are working right now, and then the other part of it, which is equally as important, if not more important, is the education of younger people, so that when they get to their working lives, hopefully a lot of the barriers and challenges that are in place currently are, well, hopefully they don't exist, or at least they're not the way they are today. And so the how you impact and influence your children and children generally is huge. Do you mind me asking, like, how you do that yourself as a parent, given what you do? Is it something that you talk openly about, and how much do you cover?
Hmm. If William was here now, he would roll his eyes at you, Lloyd, and he would say, "Oh my God, you're not talking about that again, are you? You can't be talking about that again." There are unfair issues and challenges for men, Mummy, just as much as there are women. And I say, yes, I know, I get that. But I think when I'm parenting, we've always had a relationship whereby there's nothing off the table.
Sure.
You know, I am the mum whereby you ask me a question, you're going to get the answer. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. You ask me anything.
Yeah.
Crack on, because everything is above board. So I'll give you an example around the parenting piece and Andrew Tate.
Yep.
So I've got a child who is on YouTube. He lets me know that actually thinks Andrew Tate, from a societal perspective, is pretty cool.
Okay.
It's pretty cool, Mummy. He's doing a lot. He's really got this masculine thing down.
Mm.
Mummy takes several deep breaths, gives herself an hour, goes and sits with child. And what we talked about is the fact that when we're considering what we're doing from a social perspective and some of the hidden barriers, some of the challenges that women face, we don't just face challenges in the workplace, we face them from a societal perspective. And, you know, how do we raise girls to understand they can be who they are, they can have their own opinion, we can normalise being noisy, normalise verbalising what we want. You know, how often as a child, for girls in particular, were you told to be quiet, not to be bossy? don't ask again. And these are all these subtle messages that get delivered to us. And so when it comes to raising my child, I raise him to use his voice, use your voice, but I also raise him to speak from the heart. Because again, for men, we teach men that they can't be emotional. We teach men that they can't be driven by their emotions. We teach them that they're not allowed to cry or to verbalize how they feel, or they're not allowed to be low or have a bad day. And that they've got to be these strong leaders who are hyper-focused and the main earner. And so in my house, I teach William that he must speak with his heart.
Yeah.
What's really going on in your heart? And ever since he could speak, I taught him to use the words in his heart, even to the point when we had a worry jar. And so when we were going through our divorce, and Daddy's a great daddy, an amazing daddy, but when we were going through our divorce, we both taught William to speak with his heart. What are the words in your heart? And he does that now, even to today. He's very emotionally intelligent, and he can tell you exactly what's going on for him.
I love that. I think Francesca, my eldest daughter, is 7, and she came down the stairs the other evening and she said, "Daddy, what's my weakness?" And I was thrown by it. But she's a smart little girl. Yeah, she's super clever, super switched on, very very, very kind, but also very emotionally intelligent, I think. She said that she thinks her weakness is that she worries too much. And actually, I tried to help her understand that worrying is not actually a weakness. It's a strength, because if you worry, it's because you care, and it's because your decisions are heart led, not head led. And so you're worrying because you care about people, and that you have good intentions, and that you want to see the best in the outcomes. And actually, that's a really positive thing. But I think it's hard. It's hard. It's hard for it's hard for adults, like all the things we're talking about. It's incredible. It's hard for children as well, because of the number of external influences. And Francesca's only 7, so thankfully she's not really YouTubing too much yet. But that time's going to come, and then that scares the life out of me. The amount of information out there that you can access. Do you think that I was thinking about this yesterday evening as a question to ask. And do you think, the question is this: I think that I am a man who is emotionally intelligent, who cares a lot, and who wants to help create change. And a lot of what I've learned from you actually in the last 18 months around women in work, in all sectors, not just SaaS and tech, just women in work generally, and all the women that I've met off the back of that through the events. There's some things that I knew, or probably knew, but hadn't really thought about a lot. And there's a lot that you just kind of brought to my attention in terms of reports, stats, information that I'd never gone looking for, so I'm never going to find it, right? But then when you start looking for these things, you find a lot. And that's been amazing for me. But I'm also aware that even though I feel like I'm a very well-intentioned man, I sometimes don't find it easy to have these conversations and demonstrate my understanding, because I'm fearful of getting something wrong or saying something wrong. And if I to give you an example, I had a conversation with somebody a while ago, and I said I used the term female rather than women. And somebody said to me, "It's not. You can't really say. Not you can't say female. We shouldn't really say female. It's women." I think I was talking about founders. I was like female founders rather than women founders, and I just didn't understand why. I was like, I don't. Like, no one's ever brought that to my attention, so I have I didn't know. And I guess the question I have is, how easy or hard do you think it is for men who have the right intentions to do the right thing and to make an impact on the topics that you coach about and talk about day in, day out?
I think if we had another 65 billion of you, Lloyd, we'd be in a much better place. The curiosity, the intent to learn, the intent to get it right, the openness, the willingness to listen, the genuine integrity that sits around. Hang on a minute, I wasn't aware of that. Tell me more. No defensiveness, no need to set it right, but just a need to understand.
Yep.
And I think when we look at what's going on in the globe at the moment, and when we look at what's happening around us, we know what's going on the other side of the pond. So we know that we are now in a position whereby the likes of Accenture, Meta, Alphabet are removing any of their female talent programs. Removing a female talent program. We're literally rolling the clock back hundreds of years. We're literally saying we don't recognise this anymore as an issue. Trump is also going to make sure that those organisations, in fact, any organisation that has a program labelled a female talent program or a gender-specific program, not only are they sunsetting their ED&I goals, there's likely to be financial penalties. So you think about the example that we're setting young men across the globe, and you look and you think, so that example, that communication is explaining that none of this matters. It's all woke bullshit. That's what that example says. It says it's woke bullshit. It then further says, as far as representation goes, it further then says, well, as long as we're white, male, middle-aged and privileged, that's all we need to be a leader. So it sets this impression piece that actually any other representation other than that is right. So you think about intersectionality, forget the women piece, think about intersectionality, think about what happens from a race perspective, an ability perspective, a neurotypical perspective. There's so many challenges, and yet what we're saying is no, we're not gonna do that. And so I think to answer your question, I realise I've gone around it the long way, but to answer your question, how important is it that we have male allies? It is imperative. It's just imperative. That is the one link that will make the difference. You can buy female talent programs, you can implement them. In my experience, absolutely everybody loves a female talent program. Brilliant. Loved it. Got loads out of it. Now you're going to go back and swim in the same sea where you still now have all of those invisible barriers. And those invisible barriers aren't barriers that men necessarily are aware of, which I think is what you're talking about. Those invisible barriers are not things that we ever educate men on. We don't sit at the age of 6 or 7 in a classroom and say, right, the world isn't a fair place. Here are some of the psychological barriers. Here are some of the biases that women will experience. And this is why. We don't do that. And so when we think about men making mistakes, can we just normalize that and say there's no wonder? How can you know what you don't know? And then even when you do know, maybe we make a mistake because we're all human, and that's fine. I would rather be around a million men who are keen and willing and want to be an ally, but are happy to fall over.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking to do is take anybody off at the knees that falls over and makes a mistake. Let's not do that. Let's raise the next generation of consciously parented boys and men. And let's also not, because again, I'm very aware that the narrative I'm using is as though gender is binary. I don't believe it is. But let's be in a position whereby we recognise that all genders matter, all genders have challenges, but let's also recognise that male allies have challenges. For a man to go for an executive director role and mentioned that actually what he would really like to do is have equal paternity leave, regardless as to whether or not it's a policy for the organisation, he's less likely to do it. He's less likely to do it. It's going to feel as though it's going to be frowned upon, looks as though he's not as committed. Why? No, for a man to up and leave at 4:00 in the afternoon because he wants to do the school run or 3:30 isn't something they would feel comfortable doing. For a man to say, actually, I'm really struggling at the moment at home from a mental health point of view because my partner's going through menopause. Every single woman is going to hit menopause. It's only 2 guarantees in life. You're going to die or you're going to hit menopause. That's it as a woman. So, it's fun, isn't it?
there's a LinkedIn clip there.
What's going to happen? So what we know is that we're supporting women in the workplace around menopause, but what are we doing to support the men that are supporting the women at home? You see, that there's all these invisible barriers that we don't talk about, that we don't allow to come to fruition, that are just this, it's like this unspoken rule.
Yeah.
But there aren't challenges, and there's challenges for every gender, and then you add on the intersectionality layers, and you're just up against it. And yet we could do so much by just talking, just collaborate, just understand. Look at all the research points. There's so much data out there.
I think the hard part is that, no, it's all hard. There's another podcast we're launching, I told you yesterday, called It's Fucking Hard.
I love that, because it is fucking hard.
It is hard. It is hard to grow a business. It is hard to own your own business. It is hard to get so many of the challenges that exist, not necessarily get them right, but at least try and do something about them. And I think, what you're saying is that there's a real issue. If at the beginning, what I heard there, and what I think is that at the beginning of life, there's so much that can be done. So like school years, so much that can be done that's not done. And then at not the end of life, but take it to the other end of like the biggest shareholder owned businesses in the world, the most established brands, also now saying, do you know what, this isn't, like, what they're basically saying is this is not important to us.
Right.
What's important to us is making sure that our shareholders are happy and that our share price is right. Like, fundamentally, the rest of it is don't really care. But that's the truth of the matter. And it's interesting because I was on the radio this morning. I was hearing it's slightly off topic, but it's the same thing. Is that BP announced that they were cutting all investment in their green projects, basically, to double down on oil and gas, because their last 2 profits have been well below expectations, and their shareholders aren't happy. And so they basically said they're not doing it, but they're saying our big investment is on making sure we get oil and gas right, not on kind of sustainability projects, which is, there's so, I'm not trying to, no, I'm not comparing the two, but it's these big brands, these huge organizations that could be having such a positive impact on so many of the big challenges that exist in life aren't doing it. They're not doing it, and they're not going to do it. I can't see that changing, because they'll always be answerable to the shareholders, the investors. But that leads me into my question, actually, which is, if I look at what I love about recruiting in kind of the software tech space is that we work with a lot of really interesting people, often young founders, unfortunately mostly male, but nonetheless interesting, smart individuals who have seen a problem that exists in the world and designed a piece of technology to do it. And so they need to build a business and build a team. And by the time they come to us and talk about how they're going to build that team, they already have the challenges of diversity, and not just gender, but just diversity generally. And I can give you an actual example of this, where a client that we worked with a few years ago here in the insurance space, who founded by two incredible guys, who were about 20 people in the business, growing fast in the insurance space, and like basically had a team of white men. And the founder said, like, we have to sort this out now. Like, we have to sort this out right now for loads of different reasons. And not least that if we do this, we're just going to create this environment where there's no new ideas. Nothing changes because we're just full of white men. So what we're going to do now is all of our hires, we have to make sure we have a 50-50 split when it comes to shortlisting. If you're going into those companies today and you're speaking to those founders at that stage, what does the conversation look like? What are the kind of things that you're questioning them on, targeting them on, educating them on that helps them to see not just the immediate challenge that exists in their business, but what that looks like when they play it forward?
It's a really interesting one because do I enjoy those conversations? Absolutely not. Do I find them emotional? Yeah, I do. Do I find them frustrating?
Yep.
Fucking frustrating. Do I find it a narrow-minded approach to not be paying attention to what your talent pipeline looks like, to how you're attracting individuals that, there's some serious talent out there. And I always find it quite interesting because those organizations usually start off, their opening gambit, Lloyd, is usually there just aren't enough women in this space.
Mm.
And that's where it takes every part of Jo to stay in her seat and not make the entire C-suite get up, walk towards the fucking front door of the business because you're right in the middle of fucking Liverpool Street, open the door. Wow, there's a shit ton of women. Interesting. So there are women. They're just not coming to you. Why aren't they coming to you? Right, let's now look at your policies and your procedures. So, women will represent, by 2030, we will represent the majority, something like 75% of the spend, of the discretionary spend that's out there. Women will be core buyers, and that's because women are choosing not to marry as quickly, not to have children as early. They're choosing to remain single, and they're choosing to embed themselves in the workplace. That's the stats and the data, right?
Mm.
So now let's take Steve, the CEO, because he's always called Steve, right? Steve or Dave. And actually, we know from the stats. Anybody who's listening is called Steve or Dave. You're very welcome to have a look at the stats because you're actually more likely to be called Steve or Dave and be a FTSE 100 chief exec than you are to be a woman. Welcome. So let's take Steve or Dave and let's look at who their buyers are going to be in 10 years' time, 5 years' time.
Yeah.
How are you internally representing your customer base? Oh, fuck me, you're not, are you? Because you want to sell this tech across the board. You want to sell it to anyone and everyone. And yet you are representing you're representing one person type. How are you inclusive to your customer base if you are not making sure you've got a 50-50 representation across all? Not just women, female, across all genders, across all levels of intersectionality. It's fascinating for me that the likes of Accenture, the likes of Alphabet, the likes of Meta have pulled back on this. And it's almost as though they're blind to who's going to be buying. Why would we, when we have the buying power, invest? Why would we bother? We're not going to. You take the likes of Gucci and their handbags. It's really interesting. Gucci, the father dies and chooses to leave power and control of the business to the sons and doesn't give it to his oldest daughter. It's a handbag. Who do you think's buying the handbag? So there's this real lack of foresight. Now, when we then dive down a little bit more into the actual data, and when we look at representation, if we think about it through the prism, the prism is inclusion. It's diversity, it's inclusion, it's belonging. But just think about it, first of all, through representation. Think about it through customer representation. We want to make sure that when Gen Z is buying, and Gen Z in the next few years will be our buyers, right? They are the people who will be in the supply chain. They're not looking to work with organizations that don't have any agility, that can't keep up pace. They're not looking to work with organizations who are only commercially driven, regardless as to some of the bigger organizations' agenda being clearly commercially driven. Our buyers are buying based on value. So you're going to have a real issue if you're not staying on this road. But then in order to stay on the road and to be able to hire the talent that is representative, and I quite like the word representative. I've never used ED&I across anything I do. Don't see myself as an ED&I consultant, just representative of women, right?
Yep.
And so when you think about how we bring women into the business, or even if they would look at working for you, even if you decide that you do want to bring women in, there's a lot of work to do to get it right. So everything from what are you doing around flexible working? I've had 2 clients this week alone deselect from huge organisations on the basis that they've said you've got to be in the office 4 days a week. Why? Because Steve's made the decision that he can't pull out of the 5-year contract for renting the property. Is that why? Steve, go and negotiate, Bella. It's not a location thing. If her productivity is there, same as if his productivity is there, a tie up the right skill set. So flexible working and hybrid working is so key, because from a purely female representative lens, for the women's lens, she is much more likely to have responsibility for childcare, for non-paid domestic care, something like 3.7 hours a day versus 1.5 for men. She needs to be around. When it comes to job descriptions, she will deselect immediately if she doesn't think that she hits the majority of the bullet points.
Yep.
Men will apply at 60%. Then you look at the language that's looked in job descriptions, the subtle biases in the language. If you're using language that is more gender coded towards men, there's much more, the terminology that is likely to be much more around achievement, around speed, around pace, around all that, you're going to find that women deselect.
Why is that?
Well, what women fear is not being good enough.
Okay.
They fear that they don't have the skills to do the job, because it will be like Steve walking into a room every day of Brendas.
Yeah.
And these Brendas are a different colour.
Yeah.
They look different. They sound different.
Mm-hmm.
But now Brendas are all completely in control of the agenda.
Yeah.
Steve's thinking, shit, should I be in here? It's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that we're victims. In fact, most of my clients are they're all powerhouses, but actually it's about understanding that you can externalise the challenges rather than internalise them. And so often we internalise them and think we're not good enough. And actually it's much more to do with the systems and society than it's anything to do with ourselves.
Also on that front, I think that I'm hoping you might have the answer to this, but it's this conversational point. You just said it. A lot of your clients are powerhouses, and you are definitely a powerhouse. And there are lots of male equivalent powerhouses, but there are also lots of women out there who don't want to be a powerhouse. They're not because they couldn't, they just don't want to. And so if the powerhouses are having challenges and problems, then the non-powerhouses must be having a lot more challenges and problems. They just don't know how to solve them. And that's a problem, I think, for founders and for businesses growing, because actually, if I look at my world, if I find a powerhouse sales director and they're a woman, I'm like, oh, this is a no-brainer. This is an absolute no-brainer. And my founder's going, absolute no-brainer. But in the same way that within men, and when I talk about powerhouse, I'm talking about not just kind of outspoken, noisy. I'm talking about actually, everything they do is just, it just comes from the heart. They do everything to the best of their ability. They're just not just top performers in terms of high performance, but they're just those people that I want to spend time with, regardless of gender. And so founders are always going to hire those people. they're always going to hire those people because they just stand out. They just regard. But it's everyone below that. So it's the women who don't either want to be or don't feel like they can be, and founders miss out on hiring a lot of those people because they just don't stand out in the interview process. That's the reality, and that's because of the interview process and the way that it's structured, I think. But how can we help businesses to be able to access more of that group? Because that's the big group. That's the majority, isn't it?
I think when we take the bell curve, that's our classic bell curve, isn't it? It's the 20% are underperformers and actually never really want to do anything or go anywhere. You got the 60% who, and actually we really need the 60%. And you talk about being powerhouses. We don't all need to be powerhouses. In fact, we should all stand our own lane and do what makes us happy because we're coming around once, right? Let's not be or do anything that we don't want to do. And there's nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with being a powerhouse. There's nothing wrong with not being, and there's nothing wrong with sometimes being a powerhouse and other times not. Whatever. Your own ambition is your own ambition level, right?
Yep.
But that 60% that falls kind of not behind, but isn't necessarily that top 20% of absolute powerhouses, go-getters. So they're going to hit it head on, right? They're going to feel it much more because they constantly push in and there's constant pushback. But that 60% is really where, to your point, they won't feel it or notice it. They just know that. It's a bit trickier for me to do that. That was a microaggression that I just got. But they won't see it as a microaggression. They'll think, oh, well, I was probably wrong.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So whereas your 20% powerhouses will hear a microaggression, go, hang on a second, that was a microaggression. Stick that left. That I'm coming back to what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Don't interrupt me, I haven't finished yet. Whereas your 60% will see those hidden barriers and go, oh, they probably interrupted me because I was waffling. So how do we help these organisations with your question? Well, we do it through culture. So we look at culture and we say, right, what's the temperature of your culture? How inclusive is your culture? How representative is your culture? In terms of your leadership, what does your leadership understand in terms of what's required from a behavioural perspective to get this right for everybody? To make sure everybody feels like they belong. It's great bringing them in, but we'll just churn them in 3 months. You know this. We'll churn them in 3 months if people don't feel like they belong.
Yeah.
So there's something about belonging. There's also this piece about what's the context. In other words, what's the belief of everybody in the team that we all want to make sure that everyone belongs. And the two are different, right? You've got culture, which is this unspoken piece around behaviours. We then got context, which is the belief of the individuals in the business to say, hang on a minute, are we hiring women because we're being performative, or are we doing it? And are we making sure that we are representative? And we want to do this for the longer term because we can see the greater good, not just commercially, but from a client experience perspective, but also from a longevity perspective. Why are we doing this? Then we need to look at processes and policies. So what's actually really in place, and not just those written processes or policies, but actually what's the behaviours that sit around them.
Yep.
Now, it's all very well saying that we're flexible. Well, are you? Because if you're flexible, but you also want an email to say that you've done the school run, that's not flexible. What's the actual behaviours that sit around processes, and what do we need to do with leadership to help them with that? I think the other challenge is that with 5 different generations in the workplace, we're dealing with the expectation of a baby boomer or the expectation of a millennial that because they did 12 hours in the office, you must remember this as well. I remember we would do 10-hour days, 12-hour days, whatever it took in the office. And it was expected. I remember working in cultures whereby you would not go unless the leader had gone. It could be 7 o'clock at night. It could be starving hungry and finish work 2 hours ago, but I'm not bloody going. Because culturally it looks bad. Whereas I was towards the twilight of my corporate career. Right? Yeah, 3 o'clock. Set up. I'm done. Go on, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, we talked a lot about we talked a lot about companies and reflected a bit on kind of some of the biggest name brands and what's bad, what's not going well, and it can often. I sometimes find that it's easy for me to ask questions around this topic that are kind of more, what's wrong? What are we not doing? What are we not doing right? Like, what more can we do? I'm interested to understand like who and what do you see of people or companies that are doing really great things to change this?
So I think with every challenge in a market comes opportunity. And we know that, don't we? Best part of 20, 30 years working in recruitment, we know that the market's never what we want the market to be. There's always too many candidates or not enough clients or vice versa. We're never happy with the market. We'll have a moan about it all day. But what we also know is that with challenge brings opportunity. And so what I really see is that the scale-ups are all over this. The scale-ups, the techs, those who are really utilising AI to their benefit, are now hiring based on skills. So they're working based on, we're going to hire the person for the skill set. We're going to make sure that we've got plenty of agility in the business, plenty of bandwidth. And whilst you might be hired in one capacity, basically you're an agent for the business. So you will go wherever the business needs you, depending upon what the demands are. And what I think we will see, and to answer your question about the scale-ups, what the scale-ups are doing really well is that they're thinking about the skills taxonomy across the group. Okay, so I've now got somebody who's, I don't know, for example, in accounts or credit control. Yeah, they can do that, but we know that the AI will strip 40% of their role in the next 18 months. What can we do right now, bandwidth-wise? Let's skin them up. What else can we do? Oh, customer experience would be really helpful. Let's get them out with the sales team. So what we see in terms of opportunity is in that middle band, is in that growth sector. That's where they're innovative and that's where they're really jumping on board. And that's where my women are flying off to do jobs that are so exciting in sectors of things like energy and things like electronic vehicles, in things like data and AI, where those organizations are going, hang on a minute, we know if we get this right now, that gives us longevity and sustainability, and therefore that automatically means that we're going to be here and profitable for a much longer period of time. And they're kind of, and I think those organizations are the ones that are really moving the dial.
Yeah. Love it. One final question for you. Love to leave on a kind of a positive spin before we kind of wrap things up. We could go on forever, by the way, but I'm also conscious of the fact that people have lives to live. Why don't you listen to us for 3 hours? We could just talk about this. I've got loads more. I've got loads more questions I could ask as well. I like to leave the end of these conversations with people thinking about one thing that maybe they could do or could take from this conversation on the topic that they could implement themselves, regardless of what they're doing, their role, their gender, their whatever they fall into. What's one thing that you think everyone can do today that would help in a way to move the dial?
I think there's one word for me, and it's compassion.
Okay.
If the world was a more compassionate place, we would all be in a position where actually the woman behind the women is no longer in business. That's what I'd love. I would love that. Yes, I've carved out an opportunity in the market, but I would much prefer it wasn't there. I would love it if there weren't clients coming on board. There's, my heart's mission is I don't want women to have to fight as hard as we do. So if the world was full of compassion, imagine if Steve or Dave, the chief exec, has had an issue, and imagine that the compassion, maybe taking that beat, maybe taking 10 minutes and thinking, why has that happened? And what can I do to help? And in the same way that the much more experienced female exec watches the next woman trying to come up the ranks, and maybe rather than not pulling up the ladder, like all of the research says that we do, women can be much more detrimental to other women's careers than men. Maybe you don't pull up the ladder. Maybe you sit down, maybe you take your shoes off and you sit and you talk to that rookie, to that early years, and you help her to understand where she needs to develop and what you can do to help her. And I just think, imagine if we were all so much more compassionate. Imagine if we all took the time for each other, what would happen? And I'm not romanticizing it, but just imagine if just today you just took a bit more time for somebody else and really understood where they were coming from.
I love that. I didn't have that when I was younger. personally. No, no, that's not fair. I'm being hard on myself. I did, but it's way more important to me now. I think is probably the better way to frame it. But Jo, that's honestly been fantastic. Thank you. There's a lot more that we can talk about and cover, but I'm also conscious. I said to you yesterday, I don't. I think there's a balance between moving the conversation on and changing the narrative and keeping it. And from your perspective as well, I don't want you to feel like you talk a lot. Yeah, it is your mission, and so obviously that's. But I also want to bring an audience listening to this to be able to see it from a different lens and a different perspective, and hear ideas and information that's fresh. And I think there's loads that we've covered there today, which is highly, highly relevant. And the last point's amazing. So thank you. And yeah, I feel blessed and privileged that you kind of, that we're in each other's lives now. There's a lot of work we've got to do. And there's a lot of plans and ideas that we've got, but yeah, that's been amazing.
I can't thank you enough for having me on. I absolutely love working with you. I think you should be very proud of me because I have kept any swearing or potty mouth. Actually, I've been very good, I think you'll find. Don't you? Not my stop and I. I've had to hold back.
Well, when I'm gonna have you on as a guest again on the other podcast that we're gonna do, which is the short format one. And then that one you can be, I mean, you can just unleash, absolutely unleash.
Can we
Yeah.
talk about this LinkedIn algorithm on the next one? Because that is fucking me right over at the moment.
You and me, you and me both. You and me both. Jo, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone listening to it takes as much as they can, and if they're interested, connects with you on LinkedIn, because the amount of interesting content that you share, for me, I learn loads. So thank you.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thanks for having me.